So let's say hypothetically in this scenario we were making a racing game. We would attach like our script to kind of rotate this tire to make it look like the car is moving on that tire right there, because that tire is a game object. This is a really interesting paradigm this is a really interesting paradigm that you have to kind of like shift your thinking in if you've been building out like websites or just kind of like programs without like a UI like this where you can kind of like grab particular objects and start scripting them. So it's a bit of a learning curve there, but also like it's great because like you can see your changes almost instantaneously. So enough about me rambling about Unity. Let's get into coding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a project that I've kind of wanted to like just start us with, and that is this guy here. So this is going to be for you. 1 second. This is going to be lost. 1 second. It's curse of the live demos, right? Let's refresh this. So this is Unity. This is like where you would start when you're building out Unity. When you start a project in Unity. You were talking about versions of Unity. These are currently like kind of like the versions that you can use in Unity, along with a couple of other like beta-based Unity versions. So currently we're going to use like 2017.430F, which is like the long-term supported version of Unity. What that means is basically, hey, we know projects take like over 2 years to make, especially games. So instead of having you upgrade to another version of Unity, which will more than likely break your project, we're going to support the current version for at least 2 years. So you can kind of build your project on that version and not have to worry about upgrading. But let's say if you were to start a new project, you'd probably want to go with the latest version, just depending on what you're trying to do. So for example, let's say if I wanted to make a 2019 project, this is one of the benefits we have on that front. So I'm going to say select new in 2019, and this is one of the benefits of like the new version of Unity. You can choose between like what project template you kind of want to start with. I'm going to give a small explanation of each. Like 2D project, you're making a 2D game. You're making Cuphead 2, so you want to kind of just stick to 2D. Here's your version there. If you're making a 3D project, usually this is where I start with for VR. It's really cool. You just start with the 3D editor and you're set there. 3D with extras, this is like 3D with a little bit more sauce on there. Like the best way to explain it is like there's extra features, including like ways to like affect shaders, which are the way your computer kind of sees things in the world, a little bit easier. Lightweight, high definition render pipeline. You're making something for PlayStation 5 and you want to make it look as super high def as possible. This is like Unity kind of competing with Unreal's whole like really beautiful rendering process. But also there's something that's really cool for VR development in 2019 called lightweight render pipeline. And this is basically Unity's way of just kind of like making sure like you're only using the base stuff that you need in order to make sure like you're hitting performance on like your application in VR. So I'm not going to start this project because I have like a project sitting here. Of course, it's just saying, hey, that's fine. Let's go into there and open that up. This is one of the Trailblazers. I'll show you that later. I didn't want to open that up for you yet, but you got a sneak peek. So you create a project and you start that up here. I'm going to just put So you create a project and it'll start loading. I'm going to wait until that loads, and we have, this is an example of a project in Unity. I'm gonna create a new one. This is basically what we're building. It's gonna be super basic, so don't worry, there's nothing too complex here. But when you start a project from scratch, you would start in a scene here. So I'm gonna create a new scene, and a scene is basically a level in a game. So stop. When you start this up, this is what you get. It's basically an empty project with just a camera, and that camera is just rendering everything that you will see in the game. And right now, all you get is just this horizon line here. So let's say if we wanted to kind of preview this, we would hit this button on the top here called play, and we would just see our blank project. So that is like how you would kind of like play Unity. But look at all these windows. Like what's even going on here? So let me just explain a little bit more about what Unity's trying to do here, why this looks so complicated, and kind of like hopefully debunk all of this to kind of make it less complicated for everybody. So to the left here, this section here is called the hierarchy. This is everything that currently is in your level. So let's say if I wanted to create something in this level, I would right click in hierarchy, or I would select it from this menu here called game object. But let's say I wanted to make a cube here. I just created a cube, and that cube is now in our hierarchy, and we can kind of see that in our world right now. So let's preview this, and yeah, we just have a cube here. I know, exciting stuff. But basically, this hierarchy is a way of kind of explaining and understanding what's in your scene, so you'd never really lose track, or you can select something to write a script on there. So like, let's say for example here, I want to say like, hi everyone. This is the way you would add a script to your project. I'm gonna add this and then explain a little bit more about what's going on here. But once you select a object in your hierarchy that's currently in the level, you get an inspector here, which is basically everything that is on this object. And what does that mean? There's basically, it gives you an understanding of where it is in the world. So if we were to change this field, the position, the rotation, or like the scale, it kind of controls everything that is related to where this object is in space in your world. So that's what transform does. So let's say hypothetically, if you wanted to move an object, you can use your script to actually go into transform and adjust the movement from there. The next thing that is on the inspector, of course, is the box collider. And what that basically means is most game objects would have a collider, or you can turn it off if you really don't need a collider on it. But basically, this stops you from like running into it. A collider is just kind of like collision in games. When you hit a wall in a racing game, that's a collider stopping you. And what's great about it is like you can kind of like have this collider bigger or smaller than the object based off of these parameters here. And that kind of helps in certain aspects of gameplay where, let's say if you wanted to make the game a little bit easier for players, you'd probably give your enemy a bigger collider just to make sure like, hey, a player shot the enemy like right around like the shoulder area or something like that with an arrow. you'd probably want to like give that a little bit of a pass to kind of say, hey, you hit the player. I mean, you hit the enemy. That's your way of kind of handling that. You'd also probably do the same thing for the opposite thing for players. You'd probably make the hitbox a little bit smaller just to kind of give the player that feeling of like, wow, this I narrowly escaped that like that attack or something like that. So that is what's in charge of like objects interacting with other objects. This is a very interesting piece. This is called the mesh renderer. This is what's in charge of like showing the object. So if I were to like turn this off, you just don't see it. But if you look here, it's actually in the world. And that's really interesting because like you can have, this is basically what an invisible collider is in games right here. It's just kind of like an empty, it's an empty line. It's basically a wall that stops you from moving anywhere, but it's like with a collider. So, how's it going? But yeah, so that's your mesh renderer, and anything else you can add in here you can just kind of add your component based on. So like what we're gonna do is add a couple of scripts, and we're gonna kind of make like a really simple shooter here. To start, what I want to do is when I hit play here, I actually want to like move my camera around. Like when I move my mouse here, you don't